Good evening. My name is Susanne Reyto, the Chair of Violins of Hope Los Angeles County. Together with my co-chair, Jerry Morgulin, I'd like to welcome you to this reimagined opening gala, not the one we originally planned, performed by the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony at the Soraya. Since we cannot be together in person, we bring to you virtually the message and music of Violins of Hope. We gather tonight to remember our history and celebrate our future. We hope you and your loved ones are safe and well, and our thoughts are with those who have been affected by the virus directly or indirectly. We are not overlooking them, but at this time we need uplifting moments more than ever, and what better way than through music? Like Holocaust survivors who live with their indestructible spirit, these restored violins are a symbol of endurance and survival and are now singing to the world, and they will be around for many generations to tell their story. We are celebrating Violins of Hope, its founder Amnon Weinstein, his wife Asi, and son Avshi, who have been rescuing and painstakingly restoring these violins, which miraculously survived the Holocaust. For many years, Amnon collected these treasured instruments, but not until the mid-90s did he have the emotional strength to handle them. Since then, he and Avshi have lovingly restored close to 70 violins, and they have given voice to the voiceless. As the late President George H.W. Bush said, "Life is not complete until you give back." This is my giving back, and it has been a true labor of love. As many of you know, I'm a child survivor, and my mission in life has been to educate the younger, mostly uninformed generation about the history we endured and overcame. The fulfillment of bringing Violins of Hope to Los Angeles is the culmination of a couple of years of hard work and cooperation of many dedicated partners, participants, supporters, and our generous donors. Many of you know this program was brought to me by my co-chair, Jerry Morgulin, whose cousin had the project in Louisville, Kentucky. When she told me about it, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for me as a grateful survivor to give thanks and give back to the community by educating the next generations with a unique approach to restore hope by bringing renewed life to the silenced violins of the Holocaust. As most of you know, the majority of the violins were battered and broken, left in terrible condition, like the lives of people who suffered a lot, and many of whom had died. Amnon and Avshi are making the restoration of these instruments their contribution to humanity. Amnon lost 400 members of his family and wants to make sure people who may not have been affected would learn of the atrocities through the sounds of the violins, which again bring life to the world through music. We dedicate this evening to those who perished, to those who survived, and to those whose contributions helped to create and inspire meaningful changes, to assure that we will live by the words, "never again." We need to educate our youngsters about the past so they'll be able to understand how to make right choices between hate and tolerance. Our work now is more vital than ever. Your support is crucial to our efforts and will ensure that our education programs will equip students with knowledge to guard against the growing hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism today, and teach lessons of tolerance in our world of diversity and multiculturalism. Hopefully, this will ensure that our future generations will live in a world of dignity and humanity. Simon Wiesenthal said, "Hope lives when people remember." And let us also remember, when there is music, there is hope. Our goal is to teach the young generation strength to overcome adversity and build positive characteristics for survival, together with the vital importance of resistance and tolerance, all symbolized by the restored instruments. They were silenced by the war, but they are now alive, and their sound speaks the universal language of music. The message of Violins of Hope provides medicine for the soul to bring peace to the people of all ages and faiths. Elie Wiesel said, "Never again is more than a slogan. It requires action." Violins of Hope not only communicates tragedy, but recovery and hope, the move from trauma to triumph. It expresses the themes of spirit, resistance, resilience, and hope. Hans Christian Andersen said, "Where words fail, music speaks." It is unfortunate and unbelievable that a recent study conducted by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, commonly known as the Claims Conference, found that 11% of US adults and 22% of millennials said they either had not heard of or were not sure whether they had heard of the Holocaust. The importance of teaching the next generation is crucial because we survivors will not be around forever, and we must ensure that the events of the Holocaust are not forgotten or definitely not distorted in any way. The violins will outlive us and will be our storytellers for future generations. Our mission and our duty is to teach history so it will not be repeated. World Jewish Congress President Ronald S. Lauder said, "Do not be silent. Do not be complacent. Do not let this ever happen again to any people." For my husband and me, both of us survivors, there's also an important emotional connection. If we do not talk about it, if we do not remember, then the world will forget our history. It is our duty to speak about it. We do it privately, we do it publicly, and we must remember the importance of bearing witness to history. As Pope Francis recently said, if we lose our memory, we destroy our future. We must learn from the lessons of the past to ensure we have a better future for our children. The Holocaust provides one of the most effective subjects for examining basic moral issues. Students will understand that it is the responsibility of citizens in any society to learn to identify danger signals and to know when and how to react and hopefully prevent rising anti-Semitism. We must never be silent in the face of anti-Semitic hatred and intimidation, and we must never forget. The violin has formed an important aspect of Jewish culture for centuries, both as a popular instrument with classical Jewish musicians and as a central factor of social life, as in the klezmer tradition. But during the Holocaust, the violin assumed extraordinary roles within the Jewish community. For some musicians, the instrument was a liberator. For others, it was a savior that helped to spare their lives. For many, the violin provided comfort in mankind's darkest hour. Above all, the violins of the Holocaust represent strength and optimism for the future. Today, they serve as powerful reminders of an unimaginable period. They are memorials to those who perished and testaments to those who survived. Due to the COVID pandemic, the majority of the violins have returned to their home in Tel Aviv, and we are keeping the spirit of Violins of Hope alive in a reimagined way. Until their return to Los Angeles, we continue our mission to educate our next generations and provide musical enrichment, and together with our partners, bring you programs of music and culture. Let's all cherish our past, protect our present, and ensure our future. Music moves the soul, and as Beethoven said, music can change the world. This program could not have been possible without your generous support, and in particular, I'd like to thank Cheryl and David Weiner, whose major contribution provided a great opportunity to bring and spread the message of Violins of Hope to Los Angeles County. We appreciate all your past contributions, and your continued support has never been more meaningful than right now in light of the extraordinary challenges we continue to face. In closing, I'd like to thank you again, for being here, and may your life be filled with beautiful music and all your dreams come true. And now, I'd like to introduce Avshi Weinstein, who usually travels with the violins, and then in turn he will introduce his father, Amnon, the founder of Violins of Hope.
Hello, Los Angeles. Unfortunately, we cannot be together, and I'm not so sure when the instruments will be back in LA. Hopefully very, very soon. I hope you all feel well and wish to see you in person as soon as we start. I would like to meet my father, Amnon, and our very, very good friend, Hagai Shacham, one of the best violinists I know, and a very, very dear friend. As you can see, the workshop is quite packed. My father's workshop, not mine yet. And I hope you'll enjoy this very short introduction and wish to see you all face to face as soon as we can in Los Angeles. Take care and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a very special evening here, and I'm very excited to speak in front of all my instruments, and especially when they've been played by Hagai Shacham.
Amnon, thank you so much for having me in this project. The opportunity to play on those wonderful instruments, it means a lot to me. And I wish all of us and Los Angeles community best of health, especially in these difficult times. And I wish you to hear those instruments in live, in their concert, beautiful concerts, also in Los Angeles, where I used to live for 3 years. And all the best to all of us.
And we are talking about my project, in this case, Violins of Hope, that I'm doing it with my son, Avshalom, and with the great help of my wife for the last 25 years, I'm afraid. And the meaning is that we are getting violins, viola, cellos, that Jewish people played on them during the Holocaust, restoring them and giving them life. Each violin that is playing in the concert hall, and what you will hear very soon from Hagai, have gone through a huge restoration project. And this is giving me a huge satisfaction to take a violin that is behind, how to say, hope sometimes, and to work on it, and then it can sing again, and you can be played again.
Hatikva, the Israeli anthem, Atikva means the hope. As long as in the heart within the Jewish soul yearns, and towards the eastern edges onward, an eye gazes towards Zion. Our hope is not yet lost. The hope that is 2,000 years old, to be a free nation in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem.
This violin has a sound which is telling a story. It has a sound of the Jewish sound, what we are calling. When Hagai was playing today on this violin of Yaakov Zimmerman, Atikva, for me this was heartbreaking. Can you imagine the power of this little instrument, which is nothing, some pieces of wood, after all this war, to play the Atikva in such a way? What can be more to show the long way that the Jewish people have done, and the violin was with them all the time.
And now, please welcome Michael Christie, the music director of one of our partner orchestras, the New West Symphony. Michael?
Thank you, Suzanne. New West Symphony is proud to be the Ventura County partner with Violins of Hope Los Angeles County, fostering awareness of the souls lost during the Holocaust and the instruments that carry their legacies forward. It is a gut-wrenching irony that hearing these instruments now brings listeners such joy and peace, knowing the horrors their owners endured. Facing this dichotomy is the burden we, stewards of these instruments, bear, and what we must pass to future generations. In our interconnected world, we are so fortunate to be able to share performances, discussions, and images, but it is the one-to-one connection between an instrument and a listener that makes an unbreakable bond. Thank you, Susanne, for your tireless work ensuring that the musical bond connecting generations continues here in Southern California. New West Symphony will continue introducing our community to the music left by these geniuses and hope to inspire future generations to see the importance of creative endeavors. Thank you all for supporting this and various causes that champion memory and music. And now we'd like to play for you Schubert's Ave Maria.
And now, for a very special part of the evening, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jay Grimes, a musicologist from the University of North Carolina, who's the author of the book Violins of Hope. He's coming via Zoom from North Carolina, and he will tell you a little bit about himself and then describe the genesis for writing this book. And now, please welcome Jay.
Violins of Hope is a collection of string instruments that were owned and played by Jewish musicians before and during the Holocaust. These instruments have been painstakingly restored by Israeli luthier Amnon and his son Avshalom. Amnon and Avshalom can spend as many as 18 months piecing these instruments back together, but when they are done, the instruments come alive again on concert stages all over the world. When I visit communities to talk about the Violins of Hope, the question I always get asked first is, how does a person who is not Jewish and who can't play a lick of violin come to write this book about this collection of instruments from the Holocaust? And the answer to that question is that the university where I teach, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, had the honor of bringing 18 of the Violins of Hope to our city in 2012. It was the first time they had been anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. In the years leading up to Violins of Hope Charlotte, I became increasingly fascinated by the idea that music, this art form that I love so much and to which I've dedicated my career, could, in some circumstances, actually save lives. I took my first trip to Israel, meeting with Amnon in the Weinstein workshop in Tel Aviv. It was during this trip that I became inspired to write my book, Violins of Hope, to tell not only the stories of some of the violins, but also of Amnon and his journey and how he came to establish this deeply meaningful project.
After the war, when all the atrocities that happened in Germany, in Poland, in other places arrived to Israel, this is the most difficult time of my life. When I asked my mother, where is my grandfather, where is my grandmother, where is my aunts, where all the family, she used to take a book of Vilna to show me the Ponar forest where they killed all the Jewish people, 80,000 people, and say, here is your family. My father, when he learned what happened to his family, how he lost about 400 people, he never spoke again about the Holocaust, never. When the war ended, my father was the head of the Vilna Association in Israel. So many of the new immigrants who survived and escaped came to our house for the first day in Israel. Nobody wanted to play on a German instrument. Nobody wanted to touch it anymore. So they came to my father and said to him, if you are not buying this violin, I'm breaking it or burn it. And for my father, this was sacrilege. And he bought every instrument that people bring it to him. And he knew 100% he can never sell it again. He could not fix it, but he could not throw it away.
Amnon's spirit is expressed in the way he works. He brings the violins more to life than they were originally made for. He calls me sometimes and says, listen, there are those two sisters who came here, old ladies, who buried their violin in Holland underground and took it out after the war. And they brought me that violin. I'm going to bring it back to life.
The Holocaust is a story of death, but the Holocaust is also a story of hope, because many people survive. And the music was a part of it.
In my book, Violins of Hope, I have the honor of chronicling the stories of 6 of those violins and of what they and their owners went through together during the Holocaust. Each story is dramatic in its own way, but perhaps no story is more dramatic than that of young Motele Schlein. Motele was only 12 years old when the Nazis came into his tiny village in Ukraine and murdered his parents and his little sister. Motele escaped from his hiding spot and ran into the forest, stopping only to grab his most prized possession, his violin. Motele lived on his own in the forest for several months until he ultimately met with and joined the legendary partisan brigade known as Uncle Misha's Jewish Group. As a member of Uncle Misha's Jewish Group, Motele established himself as a clever and daring young man with a real knack for espionage. In August of 1943, Uncle Misha dispatched Motula to the Ukrainian town of Ovruch. Motula's job was to pose as a street performer, and from that vantage point, he could keep an eye out for his fellow partisans who were spies in the town. Motula did as he was instructed. He got a bowl from a local market. He sat down, he placed the bowl between his legs, tuned up his violin, and started to play. But Motula was no average street performer, and this amazingly talented young man quickly attracted a crowd. Suddenly there was a commotion from the back of the crowd. It was a Nazi officer working his way through the crowd towards young Motula. Motula was so engrossed with his music that he didn't even notice until the officer tapped him on the shoulder with his riding crop. Motula looked up and saw the Nazi uniform and immediately stood up and gave a reverential bow. "Come with me," instructed the Nazi officer. Motula had no idea where he was being taken. All he knew is he had in his pocket some forged documents that showed him to be not a young Jewish boy, but an ethnic Ukrainian looking for his father who'd gone missing during the war. And Motula knew he had no choice but to keep that cover, to save not only his own life, but the lives of his fellow partisans who were spying on the town. Motula followed the officer down a few blocks until they arrived at a soldiers' club. This was one of many restaurants that the Nazis had commandeered on their way from Germany to the Eastern Front, where the officers could stay the night and fortify their spirits with gourmet food, French wine, great music, and pretty waitresses who served them in more ways than one. The Nazi officer offered young Motula a job entertaining the guests of the officers' club. Motula had no choice but to accept to keep his cover. Motula became something of a fixture at that soldiers' club, playing for the officers every night. They adopted this young boy as one of their own. The local commandant went so far as to have a little German uniform and cap sewed for the young musician. So imagine this 12-year-old boy who had been footsteps from his family home when his father, his mother, and his sister had been murdered by the Nazis. And every day he puts on his little German cap and his German uniform, and he goes and entertains the Nazis. He laughs at their jokes. He takes their requests. But the entire time he's secretly eavesdropping on their conversations and reporting back to the partisans who are in contact with the Red Army. Motula becomes a valuable asset in the war against the Nazis. In return for performing, Motula received a few Reichsmarks every day, as well as free lunch and free dinner in the basement kitchen of the Soldiers Club. One afternoon, after having his free lunch, Motula noticed down a hallway was a door that had been left slightly ajar. And being a curious boy, Motula went to explore. He found an old storeroom with empty herring cases and wine barrels and things that had been forgotten. But along the wall across from the door, Motula noticed a jagged crack running along the foundation of the building. Motula immediately hatched a plot to fill that crack with explosives, blow up the building, and kill all of the Germans inside. The only aspect of the plot that remained unresolved was when. It was a big day for the Soldiers Club. Motula was not allowed to take any breaks. He was forced to perform well into the wee hours of the morning. When they finally let him stop, he went down into that basement kitchen and told the chef that he was simply too tired, exhausted from having played all night without any breaks. He was going to go home without dinner and just go straight to bed. But instead, he snuck down that dimly lit corridor. He found the door and closed it behind him. Using only a few rays of light from the grated window as his guide, he located the bomb and ignited it. Then he ran out of the room and up the stairs. He slowed just enough to walk past the soldier who was standing guard and throw out his right arm and proclaim a sarcastic Heil Hitler on his way out the door. And Motula vanished into the darkness. He ran for several yards before he heard the explosion behind him. He felt the ground shake beneath him. He looked over his shoulders and saw a red ball of fire extending into the sky. A group of Uncle Misha's partisans were there. They plucked him out of the river and into the back of a horse-drawn carriage and disappeared back into the safety of the dense forest. For a few moments, Motole was silent, stunned by the overwhelming success of his mission. Then, clenching a fist, he said to the red sky, "That is for my parents and my little sister." As I travel all over the country talking about the various roles that music played in Jewish lives during the Holocaust, people are often shocked to learn that there were orchestras in many of the camps. It seems to us inconceivable that an ensemble that we would associate with such great beauty would be in a place of such great despair. In the large camp complex that we refer to collectively as Auschwitz, there were several orchestras. There was a 100-piece symphony orchestra in the main camp. There were orchestras in the men's and women's camps of Birkenau, as well as ensembles throughout the various subcamps. These orchestras would sometimes play Sunday concerts for the Nazi administration. They would sometimes play as the trains came to a stop at Auschwitz. Survivors recall the doors being thrown open of their cattle cars, and their first sights were of a beautifully manicured lawn. The first sounds they heard were of an orchestra. It placated them. It lied to them. For the prisoners who were forced to play in the orchestra, that membership gave them slight privileges, maybe slight work detail. They would be the last ones to leave as the orchestra would play until the parade would stop. Then they would pack up their instruments and they too would go out for work detail. But again, they were the last ones to leave and they were the first ones back in the camp to reassemble the orchestra to start playing again. Some of them were allowed privileged positions, perhaps working inside, maybe even in the kitchen. So working inside in the Polish winter, maybe the chance to grab some extra food. Some stayed behind to repair instruments or arrange new music. The camp administration was remarkably fascinated by the repertoire of the orchestra. And so while membership in the orchestra by no means guaranteed one's survival, for some it gave them just what they needed to survive one more day and one more day and one more day until they ultimately outlived the Nazi regime. I would like to show you one more video of Amnon. This is from a French documentary called Le Voyage de Amnon, or Amnon's Journey. In this scene, Amnon visits Auschwitz with his lifelong friend, the Israeli virtuoso violinist Shlomo Mintz, bringing with them one of the Violins of Hope, which Shlomo would play in Auschwitz.
Quand il attendait les violons à Auschwitz, il ne pouvait plus croire qu'on allait les tuer. Les violons de Auschwitz-Birkenau, de Majdanek, de Sobibor, de Treblinka les ont trompés.
After their liberations, some of the musicians from the Auschwitz orchestras went on to have distinguished musical careers. Many, however, refused to ever play again. It was simply too painful to even touch their instruments. Another violin that has found its way into the Violins of Hope collection was once owned by Feivel Veninger. In October of 1941, Feivel and his family were sent on a death march through the Romanian winter to the ghettoized territory of Transnistria. In the ghetto, Feivel somehow managed to get his hands on a violin, and through playing the violin, he was able to earn enough firewood, food, and water to sustain not only himself, but also 16 family members and friends through the Holocaust. Afterwards, Feivel immigrated to Israel, bringing with him his family and the instrument which he simply called Friend. As his daughter Helen would grow up, he would take out the violin and play it for her regularly, and tell her the story about how this friend had saved his life and her mother's life. As Fievel grew older, it became increasingly difficult for him to play. By the time he was 90, he was in a home and he hadn't played for several years. And Helen went and visited him and asked him what he wanted for his birthday. And he told her, you know what? What I want more than anything else is to play Friend again. It's been several years, and I know he's not in good condition. Maybe for my birthday, you could get him repaired. I never had the chance to meet Fievel. He passed away before I began my work on the Violins of Hope book. But Helen had the foresight to bring her camera with her when she reunited her father with his friend. As I often remind my students, the Holocaust is not a single story of 6 million Jewish deaths. It is 6 million different stories, many of which we will never know. With each passing year, there are fewer survivors among us to tell their stories. That is why this Violins of Hope project is so important. These violins have their voices resound on the concert stage, and just as Freddie Davidovich had hoped, will continue to tell these stories for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, very much for your very informative presentation. And since you didn't tell much about yourself, I'd like to say a few words. You are not only a professor, but also an internationally respected musicologist at the University of North Carolina and an acclaimed author and speaker. Your book, Violins of Hope, has won a National Jewish Book Award. And thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Kligman from the UCLA Herb Alpert Music School. He holds so many lead positions, I asked him to introduce himself with the most prominent ones because I didn't want to miss anything. Mark, it's all yours.
Hello, I'm Mark Kligman. I hold the Mickey Katz Endowed Chair in Jewish Music at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. I'm a professor of musicology and ethnomusicology, and I direct the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience. I'm very grateful to have been asked to provide you some remarks of the violin in Jewish culture. My big thanks to Susanne Reyto for all that she has done to bring the Violins of Hope to Los Angeles and to include all of us. The violin is indeed a very unique and special instrument in the Jewish tradition. We can see that string instruments go back to the times of the Bible. Various individuals in the Bible are named to have been played string instruments, and also these instruments were played in the temple. The instruments are called the nevel and the kinnor. The nevel is a larger instrument, very much like a modern harp today, that would sit on the floor and be played. And the other is the kinnor. The kinnor is more like a lyre. You would hold it in your hand and then you would strum the various strings. These images, the oldest images that we have from the Jewish tradition, the nevel and the kinnor, are from coins during the Roman era. And this next image shows you how the instrument might be played, as is found in pottery and other forms of iconography. When we move on many hundreds of years, thousands of years later, into Europe, we see how important the violin is as an image, as an idea, and the sound of the violin as it exists in the Jewish tradition. There are several paintings by Marc Chagall that show a violinist playing. One is the Green Violinist. In this image, you see a violinist who's you can almost see the motion as you look at this image by Chagall, who seems to be floating on top of rooftops. As is in many images of Chagall, his native home of Vitebsk is shown in various ways, and he superimposes many images. And there are other examples from the 1920s by Chagall of a violin. So certainly the violin is very important in Jewish life. In the late 19th century, what many Jews wanted to do was to learn Western culture of the time. And the way that they did that was by playing music, and being a violinist and being discovered and being able to leave the shtetl to go to a big city was something everyone desired to do. Much like a star athlete wants to be discovered today for fame and for fortune. And this is the case for a number of instrumentalists. Two to mention in the 19th century are Yosef Joachim and Ferdinand David. Yosef Joachim was a prominent violinist, and the famous Johannes Brahms wrote his violin concerto that was dedicated to Joseph Joachim. Ferdinand David was also a prominent violinist in the 19th century, and Felix Mendelssohn wrote his famous violin concerto that was dedicated to Ferdinand David. If we go on into the 20th century, there are other luminary names that we know that we probably have all heard their recordings, all very prominent violinists of the 20th century who are Jews: Yasha Heifetz, Isaac Stern, Yehudi Menuhin, David Oistrakh, Nathan Milstein, and Misha Elman. These very prominent individuals play the violin in ways that people around the world enjoy. And even today, active instrumentalists such as Yitzhak Perlman, Shlomo Mentz, Pinchas Zuckerman, and Joshua Bell, all who are Jewish. So it's quite extraordinary that some of the most prominent violinists in the world are Jews. I want to leave you with the idea of The Fiddler on the Roof, from the musical Tevye's Muse, and also, in some form, his conscience. The violin is such an important part of Jewish life and culture and music in the European tradition. There are many other instruments too, but the violin is the one that is talked about the most, that is shown the most, and in some ways may be seen as the most expressive. The violin sounds that we hear of expression of poignancy, of sadness, of sorrow, also has the sounds of joy. So indeed, the violin is a very important part of Jewish life. Thank you.
And now for something a little different. Education is the heart of Violins of Hope, so I'd like to introduce a young man who will illustrate what we can accomplish. One of the most effective ways is to have young people visit the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum, one of our partner organizations, where they are exposed to visual history and listen to a survivor. I speak there frequently, and the presence of students brings hope and inspiration. One of these I would like to share with you. There's a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Becky Dell, who brings her students whenever she teaches about World War II and the Holocaust. On this particular day, I did my usual presentation to the students and mentioned Violins of Hope as one of the ways some of the prisoners either extended their lives or stayed alive. After their experience at the museum, Mrs. Dell requires them to complete a project to illustrate what they have learned. One of her students, James Garza, did a visual report on music of the Holocaust and ended his presentation with him playing on his violin. I was so touched and impressed. Immediately, I tried to contact his parents and asked if we could include that tonight. In addition to the piece he plays, he ended it with a piece or a part of a piece that he composed. This is one example how we make a difference in the world, whether we do it with one child at a time or one family at a time. And now, here is James.
I'm James Graza, and I'm from Mrs. Dill's class, Language Arts. Today, I'm going to be performing a piece from Schindler's List with an added cadenza.
And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Maestro Eckhard Prue, the music director of the Long Beach Symphony. He will tell you his association with the Violins of Hope and the Long Beach Symphony's plans when we can have live performances again, hopefully soon.
Hello, my name is Eckhard Prue and I am the music director of the Long Beach Symphony. On behalf of all of us at Long Beach Symphony, we hope that you are safe, healthy, and well. Especially during these exceptionally difficult times, many of us have taken to music to soothe our souls and have experienced the power of music firsthand. And music throughout history has empowered people, has given them comfort, support, and strength. And many extraordinary stories of how music has given people hope is being told by this remarkable collection of instruments, Violins of Hope. The first time I met Avshi Weinstein was in Cincinnati, when I was involved in the Violins of Hope project there, and it was one of the most memorable and meaningful musical experiences of my career. A theme of Violin of Hope that resonates with me in particular is from darkness to light, from silence to music. And we have been thrilled by the enthusiastic response throughout the greater Long Beach region, with so many individuals from all walks of life being excited about and supporting this series of concerts and educational initiatives. We cannot wait to partner with Avshi Weinstein, Niv Ashkenazi, and all our LA County partners, and to share and celebrate the legacy of Violins of Hope with our community as soon as we can. We're looking forward to bringing history alive when we take these incredible instruments into Long Beach Unified District schools and beyond, to give students an up-close and personal look into the past. And when time comes to gather our orchestra and community safely, we will make music. We will rediscover stories, musicians, and composers, and we will share the sounds of these unique instruments that celebrate humanity.
And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Gary Green Esquire, the founder, conductor of the Los Angeles Lawyers Philharmonic and Legal Voices. It's been a challenge to have new music performed, but we truly appreciate everybody's cooperation, and with Gary's leadership, his group really went the extra mile. And now please welcome Maestro Green and his orchestra and choir.
I selected a piece of music for this program called Schlaf mein Kind. It's a very touching Yiddish lullaby meaning sleep my child. The words were by David Einhorn, and the music for orchestra and women's chorus is by contemporary composer Alan E. Naplin. Sleep my child and rest. Let your troubles not be great, for you can always be cradled in your mother's arms. Now, with members of my orchestra, the Los Angeles Lawyers Philharmonic, and our chorus, Legal Voices, please hear Schlaf mein Kind.
Sure.
Thank you so much, every one of you participants tonight. This could not have been done without your great support and dedication. You all went the extra mile during these challenging times. We created this multifaceted evening so you, the audience, can imagine the fabulous music and cultural programs we will bring you when the violins return, hopefully very soon. The partners of Violins of Hope will continue to bring you programs like the new West Symphony, bringing you a program highlighting the Violins of Hope the weekend of January 30 and 31st. And that very same Sunday, the 31st, the Braid, formerly the Jewish Women's Theater, will bring you their production of the play, Stories from the Violins of Hope, with music provided by members of the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony Chamber Players. Stay tuned for further information. We brought this evening as our gift to you, our community, and we certainly hope you enjoyed it and will consider a donation to support our ongoing effort to reach as many people as possible and bring more fabulous performances, cultural presentations, and school programs to our community. Please stay safe and hope to see you in person very soon.